In the wild, encounters with bears can turn deadly in an instant, leaving behind stories that are both terrifying and unforgettable. From the dense forests of Russia to the remote wilderness of Montana, these true accounts reveal the raw power of nature and the unpredictability of wildlife. In this video, we'll explore 6 chilling tales of bear attacks on humans, showcasing the harrowing experiences of those who face these magnificent yet dangerous creatures. Join us as we delve into these gripping stories that remind us of the fine line between human curiosity and the primal instincts of the wild. The cabin sat deep in the birch and pine of Ussuri Krai, an unmarked wooden shell buried under camouflage netting. It was built to last 2 weeks. 9 officers from a covert anti-poaching unit had hauled their gear in by truck, then crossed the final kilometer on foot. They were veterans, combat-trained, some with border patrol experience, all used to the cold, the dark, and the quiet tension of long missions. The temporary field shelter was primitive but secure, outfitted with satellite radio, thermal cameras, and reinforced doors, except one. The kitchen door was steel like the rest, but on the night of June 4th it was not bolted. They were tracking illegal bear baiters, locals who dumped fish remains and animal heads in the forest to lure grizzlies and then shoot them from a distance. The officers had seen the aftermath days earlier: half-buried bait piles, stripped bone, and old cartridge casings in the moss. The grizzlies in the region were enormous, conditioned to associate human scent with food. One had left prints nearly the width of a man's chest. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with body heat, old coffee, and sweat. Most of the men were asleep. The ranking officer, a 38-year-old lieutenant with a scarred lip from a prior border skirmish, was reviewing infrared footage at the comms desk, headphones on, eyes bleary. He didn't hear anything at first. Then came the crash. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like a battering ram. The kitchen door exploded inward, metal bending with a groan. One of the officers closest to the entry was still sitting on his cot when the bear struck. The grizzly was massive, over 700 kilograms of fur, muscle, and aggression, its muzzle wet from the bait it had been feeding on for days. It slammed into him, driving him into the wall. Bones broke with a sickening crack. The room descended into chaos. Another officer lunged for his rifle, but the bear was already on him. Its paw, tipped with claws like butcher knives, tore across his back. He screamed, dropped the weapon, and disappeared beneath the creature's bulk. Gunfire erupted, wild and deafening. Bullets sparked off the steel counter. One man fired from the corner, emptying a magazine into the bear's flank. The round struck, but the grizzly only roared and turned. It barreled down the hallway, dragging a broken body behind it. An attempt was made to shut the door to the sleeping quarters, but the bear smashed through. The body cam footage later recovered showed flashing lights, panic, and chaos as the men tried to regroup. Inside such close quarters, there was no space to fight. More screams followed, then silence. The lieutenant ran. He bolted for the bathroom and slammed the door just as the bear passed the hallway junction. Inside, he fumbled with the bolt, hands shaking. Heavy movement passed outside. Breathing. Something large brushed against the door. Then silence again. For 4 hours, he remained inside that bathroom. Through the reinforced walls, he heard the bear moving, pacing, crashing into doors, sometimes going quiet. At one point, it returned to the kitchen and dragged something heavy across the floor. The sounds were wet and deliberate. Holding his radio tightly, he whispered for help. A distorted voice responded after 10 minutes. Help was on the way, but it would take time. The bear didn't wait. Twice it returned to the hallway. Once, it stopped just outside the bathroom. The lieutenant held his breath. The door creaked under the weight of the animal pressing against it. The bolt groaned. He reached for his sidearm, knowing it would do little in such a confined space. But the bear moved on, its breathing fading down the hall. By the time reinforcements arrived, the sun was rising. The backup team approached with caution. When they breached the cabin, they found devastation. The kitchen was wrecked. Blood covered the walls, ceiling, and pooled beneath splintered furniture. 5 bodies were visible, 2 partially consumed. Another lay in the hall, one arm missing. The remainder were found in the sleeping area, torn apart as if by a natural disaster. Every door had been breached except the bathroom. The lieutenant emerged pale, shaking, soaked in sweat. He didn't speak for hours. His body cam footage was intact and later archived. Investigators counted 8 confirmed fatalities. Only 1 man survived. The bear was never found. Trackers followed prints deep into the forest, but they vanished beyond a rocky ridge. Officials concluded that the animal had been conditioned by weeks of illegal baiting. It had lost its natural fear of humans. In the days that followed, a full investigation swept through the region. All wildlife operations were suspended. New safety protocols were implemented. Future shelters would include reinforced entryways, mandatory perimeter alarms, and backup teams within immediate reach. The report attributed the disaster to one unlatched bolt. One mistake. 8 lives lost. In the forests of Ussuri-Krai, nature waited for no one. It moved with instinct, with power, and without mercy. And for one long night in June, it shattered the illusion of control. In a remote wilderness area of Montana, a quiet clearing surrounded by dense lodgepole pine and aspen served as the temporary home for a modest yoga retreat. A week-long escape for 11 participants seeking calm, reflection, and distance from the noise of their daily lives. The group, mostly women in their 30s to 50s, had hiked in with 2 instructors and a camp support team, setting up canvas tents in a small kitchen beside a spring-fed stream that flowed past moss-covered boulders and blooming bear grass. There were no fences, no cell service, and no roads for miles. Just the scent of sage and pine resin, the sharp cry of jays, and the soft murmur of wind through the trees. Among them was Erica Nolan, a 43-year-old nurse from Spokane, worn thin by years of hospital shifts and a recent divorce, who had come to the retreat in search of quiet healing. On the morning of the 5th day, just after sunrise, the group gathered barefoot on their mats in a ring beneath the spreading limbs of a ponderosa pine, moving slowly through breathwork. The forest was alive with the sounds of insects and distant water. It began as nothing more than a shift in the air, a subtle break in rhythm, barely noticeable at first. The birds fell silent. Branches to the north of the clearing trembled once, then again, heavier and slower, as though something too large for the undergrowth was drawing near with deliberate weight. The grizzly emerged with no warning but the rustle of leaves and the snap of a low branch. It stepped into view silently, joints creaking and massive paws pressing into the earth. Its head hung low, body broad and dense with muscle, shoulders rolling with each step as it paused just 10 feet from the nearest yoga mat. For a moment no one moved, frozen in disbelief, hearts caught in throats, minds blank with the impossibility of what stood before them. The bear stared at the ring of humans, eyes dark and unreadable, nose twitching as it caught the mixed scents of sweat, coconut oil, and campfire smoke. Then it charged. It moved with staggering speed, like a boulder come to life. It made no sound until it was nearly upon its target. Erica had only just begun to rise from her kneeling pose when the bear collided with her. The impact knocked her flat, the air crushed from her lungs. A massive paw struck her upper arm and shoulder with brutal force, tearing through skin and muscle. Blood poured into the dirt. She felt the sting but not the pain, only terror, the closeness of its breath, the sight of insects clinging to its fur. The clearing erupted into chaos. Screams rang out. Some ran for the trees, others dove behind rocks. Instinct overwhelmed reason as the bear turned toward the motion. In that split second, Erica rolled to her side and crawled toward the tree line, arm useless, shirt soaked in blood. The bear took 2 strides after her, then veered away, distracted by the movement, the sound, the scent of adrenaline and panic. It rose onto its hind legs, towering above the ferns, swinging its head as though trying to decide which direction to pursue. Then it dropped down and disappeared into the brush, leaving the clearing stunned and silent. But it wasn't over. Several minutes passed, 5, maybe 10, before the bear returned. It circled from a new angle, this time drawn not by motion but by scent. It sniffed through backpacks and food caches abandoned in the chaos. The group watched from behind logs and trees, breath held, powerless. The bear pawed at a hammock, nosed at a bag of dried fruit, then melted once more into the forest. It returned again a 3rd time, stepping calmly back into the center of the clearing, less frantic now, more methodical, as if claiming the space as its own. With no sudden movement, no new cries, and the scent of blood dissipating into pine needles, it eventually wandered off for good. The survivors emerged slowly, voices hushed, legs trembling. Erica was found slumped against a fir trunk, pale and bleeding, breath ragged. Her wounds were deep but not fatal. The instructors wrapped her arm and activated a satellite beacon. Over an hour later, a helicopter lifted her out through the thin mountain air, her face slack with shock as the blades chopped above the trees. Wildlife officials later examined the site. They determined the bear had likely encountered bait sources in nearby valleys, making it unnaturally curious and less fearful of people. The first charge was likely territorial. The later returns showed signs of food conditioning and behavioral change. The retreat was shut down permanently. New guidelines were issued for all outdoor wellness activities in bear country, mandatory deterrents, bear spray, and trained wildlife monitors during all sessions. Erica survived but never returned to the wilderness. Others from the retreat eventually resumed outdoor activities, but none forgot the moment the silence broke, when a predator entered their circle, and the illusion of safety beneath the trees vanished forever. The Kodiak Archipelago, with its endless ridgelines and tangled forests thick with alder, spruce, and devil's club, offered a vast and raw frontier where the rules of human safety meant little to the ancient instincts of its greatest inhabitants. For a wildlife biologist named Dr. Nathan Griggs, a 37-year-old field veteran with 12 years of experience tracking brown bears across Alaska, this island represented both a scientific dream and a test of nerve. His team, a small group funded by a federal wildlife agency, had installed motion-triggered cameras and feeding plots to gather behavioral data on male brown bears during the height of the summer foraging period. Their objective was to understand how human activity was influencing bear movement and aggression. On the morning of July 12th, Griggs climbed into a small tree stand approximately 20 feet above the edge of a forest clearing. The ladder was lashed to the trunk of a large hemlock tree that overlooked a section of wilderness known for frequent bear crossings. He brought with him a field notebook, a rangefinder, and a compact satellite transponder, along with a sidearm worn more out of regulation than personal conviction. He preferred to rely on his instincts and deep knowledge of bear behavior over the speed of a weapon. The wind was light, blowing downhill, and the sunlight filtered softly through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across the mossy ground. For the first hour, he observed in silence, jotting notes and adjusting his lens as smaller wildlife moved beneath him. A red fox nosing through the undergrowth, a group of crows bickering over the remnants of a long-dead carcass, and other routine signs of life in a place still largely untouched by roads or modern noise. Then, just after 10, he saw it. A large male brown bear emerging from behind a curtain of spruce. Over 1,000 pounds of muscle and instinct moved into the clearing with cautious deliberation. Griggs immediately recognized the bear by the distinct crescent-shaped scar above its left eye. It was a known individual in their study, one that had grown increasingly bold around human equipment, frequently triggering cameras at bait stations without hesitation. The bear paused just inside the tree line, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air, its head low, massive paws nearly silent against the soft forest floor. Griggs remained completely still, barely breathing, watching through his lens as the animal began to circle the clearing with unnerving focus. It passed directly beneath the stand once, pausing to glance upward, and something changed in that instant. The moment lingered too long. Griggs sensed, rather than logically concluded, that the bear had shifted from mere curiosity to a deeper awareness. It was no longer just investigating its surroundings. It was registering him as part of the environment, something worth challenging. The ascent was sudden and violent. Without warning, the bear rose on its hind legs and lunged at the tree, clawing into the bark and hauling its weight upward in a maneuver that was both powerful and determined. The tree trembled. Griggs gripped the stand's side rails tightly, but the structure groaned under the shifting weight. A branch snapped. The ladder lurched sideways. One final jolt, and the stand tore away from its anchor points. He fell hard, 15 feet into a snarl of roots and rock, the impact driving the air from his lungs. His arm was crushed beneath the twisted wreckage of the stand. Before he could even cry out, the bear dropped from the tree and landed just a few feet away, its mouth open, its eyes locked onto him. It covered the distance in seconds, jaws clamping down on his leg with brutal strength. He was dragged across the forest floor like debris in a current, a trail of blood marking the path as leaves and dirt scraped against his back. Griggs fought wildly, thrashing with his free leg, his hand groping for anything he could use. His fingers finally closed around a jagged piece of broken wood from the collapsed stand. He swung with all his remaining strength, striking the bear across the snout. Once, then again. A sickening crunch echoed as bone gave way. The animal recoiled with a roar that vibrated through Griggs's skull. The bear released its grip just long enough for him to wrench his shredded leg free and crawl backward, his vision swimming, every nerve screaming. Then the bear paused. Its muzzle now streaked with blood, the wild light in its eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by something colder, less impulsive, more calculating. It stood tall, bellowed one final time, and turned away, crashing into the underbrush with violent grace. Griggs lay motionless where he had fallen, gasping, barely conscious. He couldn't tell if the danger had passed or if the bear would return, as they sometimes did. His leg was mangled, the flesh torn, the bone fractured, and his arm throbbed uselessly, swelling beneath his torn jacket sleeve. The sounds of the struggle had carried. Within 10 minutes, 2 colleagues, fellow researchers stationed about a quarter-mile downhill, arrived, pale and breathless. They quickly radioed an emergency call to the rescue network and began stabilizing his injuries. Field dressings were packed into his wounds, and an emergency beacon was activated. Over an hour later, a rescue helicopter arrived, its rotor wash scattering birds from the treetops. Griggs was winched up in a sling and airlifted toward a hospital in a nearby city, leaving behind the shattered remnants of the tree stand and the blood-streaked forest floor as stark evidence of how quickly expertise could be overwhelmed by the primal force of a top predator. Medical teams later confirmed multiple fractures in his leg and wrist, deep puncture wounds, torn ligaments, and significant nerve damage. His recovery would take months, and his ability to conduct future fieldwork remained uncertain. The bear was not tracked or pursued. Its actions were ultimately classified as defensive, though its aggression level was noted as unusually high. In response, the research team shifted operations to a safer area, farther from known bear corridors. Griggs survived, but the experience left an indelible mark, not just on his body but on the entire field community. It served as a brutal reminder to every biologist, tracker, and conservationist that no amount of planning, training, or composure could completely erase the danger of entering a landscape where a single misstep or the wrong scent on the wind could provoke a lethal confrontation. Even the highest vantage point offered no guarantee of safety when what lurked below decided to climb. The mist-shrouded ridges and quiet hollows of a vast southern mountain range held a beauty that often masked the risks lurking just beyond the tree line. Each summer, the lush forests, thick with berries and fresh growth, became a haven for wildlife and a magnet for solitude seekers. 31-year-old Evan McAllister, a web designer from a nearby city, had chosen a remote section of trail near a highland bald for a weekend alone beneath the stars. He was experienced enough to handle himself in the backcountry, but not seasoned enough to understand how seasonal bear corridors functioned, nor how dangerous it could be to set up camp, especially a hammock, near dense berry thickets during peak feeding. He arrived late on the evening of August 3rd, hiked a short distance off the main trail, and slung his hammock between 2 hickories along a sloped patch just above a shaded ravine. The spot was quiet, filled with the distant calls of owls and the gentle sound of wind whispering through rhododendron leaves. As night settled in, the air cooled, and he dozed off under a waxy blanket of stars, unaware of the slow, deliberate movement that would find him hours later. Roughly half a mile away on a ridgetop clearing, a group of 4 hikers, 2 couples in their 30s, had set up a proper camp with food storage containers, a fire ring, and perimeter lights. One of them, Rachel Lane, a former EMT and trauma nurse, had taken the role of unofficial lookout, mostly out of habit. Around midnight, she was the first to hear it. High-pitched screams slicing through the woods, followed by crashing brush and what sounded like a deep, guttural growl. The camp stirred immediately. The men grabbed trekking poles while Rachel clipped on a headlamp and moved quickly toward the noise, her instincts overriding the fear twisting in her gut. The screaming had stopped by the time she reached the trail's edge. She followed the sound downhill, her headlamp beam cutting through trunks and undergrowth, until she spotted something just 30 feet ahead, partially hidden by vines and blackberries. A massive black bear gripping an unmoving shape in its jaws. As she stepped closer, the figure resolved. A man, limp and motionless, being dragged by one leg into a dense thicket. His arms trailed along the ground, his skin bloodied and torn. Straps of hammock fabric were still tangled around his limbs like frayed ribbons. Rachel shouted, her voice sharp and piercing. The rest of the group arrived seconds later, throwing sticks and rocks into the underbrush, trying to drive the animal away. But the bear barely flinched. Its eyes glinted silver in the headlamp's glare, its jaw still clamped around the man's thigh. This wasn't a startled or panicked animal. It was deliberate, calm, and committed. It had claimed the ground and what lay within it. Still, the hikers surged forward, fear overridden by adrenaline, voices raw and frantic. After what felt like minutes compressed into seconds, the bear finally released its grip, backed into the brush with a hiss, and disappeared into the darkness. Silence returned, broken only by labored breathing and the rustle of disturbed leaves. Rachel knelt beside the man. He had no pulse. His skin had gone cold. The wounds on his leg were devastating, a mix of deep tearing and crushed bone. His torso bore gouge marks that suggested the bear had struck more than once. Blood streaked the dirt and foliage in broken lines, and even for someone who had worked in emergency medicine, the sight struck with numbing weight. This was not just a medical scene. It was a moment of nature asserting itself with horrifying finality. The group contacted authorities using a handheld emergency transmitter and waited. They formed a makeshift perimeter, every shifting shadow a threat. The scent of blood and broken undergrowth hung in the air like a warning. Nearly an hour later, 2 uniformed personnel arrived with rifles and tracking dogs. It didn't take long to locate the bear. The same drag marks and prints led directly to a dense berry patch about 100 yards from the site. There, the animal stood its ground, swatted once at the dogs, and was euthanized with a single shot to the neck. Upon examination, the bear, a mature male weighing around 300 pounds, was found to be food-conditioned. It showed signs of prior relocation, including fur loss around its muzzle and a faded identification marker. Officials concluded that the bear had been defending a key foraging site, one densely packed with fruit and frequented by other bears. It had likely perceived the presence of a quiet, sleeping human as an intrusion, perhaps even a challenge, rather than a visitor to be avoided. The decision to act had been necessary, but it left an emotional toll. McAllister had unknowingly camped within a high-density bear corridor during a time of heightened feeding behavior. Unlike bears that hovered near populated campsites and avoided confrontation, this animal had grown confident and territorial. It had come to associate stillness with weakness and darkness with opportunity rather than risk. His body was recovered in the early hours of the morning. Notifications were made. For the hikers, especially Rachel, the event left a lasting scar, not simply because of the violence, but because of how quickly it unfolded. One moment, a stranger had been sleeping under the stars. The next, his life had been taken in near total silence. No preparation, training, or protocol could have truly prepared them for what it felt like to confront such raw, ancient force in the heart of the forest. In the weeks that followed, the managing agency launched an internal review. Buffer zones around known wildlife corridors were expanded. Signage in less traveled sections of the backcountry was updated. Mandatory safety briefings became required for solo hikers. Hammock use outside designated clearings was strongly discouraged. The area where McAllister had camped was mapped and flagged, with ranger patrols assigned to prevent future accidents. Yet no rule or regulation could erase the fact that the wilderness remained what it had always been, untamed, alive, and governed by instinct. It offered serenity, but also risk. And sometimes, tragically, one man's search for stillness intersected with something far older and less forgiving than he ever imagined. The snow-covered backcountry of Alberta was the kind of place where silence pressed down like a weight, where cold seemed to seep into bones and machines alike, and where winter's dominance made the land feel still and empty, until it wasn't. On December 14th, seasoned trapline guide Marcus Hale, 52, and his client Jeremy Sloan, a 30-year-old engineer from Calgary looking for an authentic wilderness experience, were finishing a multi-day expedition near the edge of the Wilmore Wilderness. Their route cut across a frozen drainage basin toward a small wooden cabin that marked the final rest stop before the long ride back to civilization. Marcus had been running these trap lines since his 20s, and while he was used to harsh weather, shifting snowpack, and the unpredictability of wilderness travel, even he felt something strange about the season. It had been unusually warm in late November, followed by sudden deep freezes, and he'd heard radio chatter from other trappers about bears still being sighted long after they should have disappeared into dens. It wasn't unheard of. Some years brought odd activity, but this felt different. And now, as they rode the last stretch with the sun dropping and wind picking up, the woods felt too quiet for this time of day. The two men rode tandem on a snowmobile with Marcus steering and Jeremy seated behind him. Tethered to the back was a plastic sled loaded with their supplies, meat from snares, pelts, fuel, tools, and emergency gear, secured beneath a heavy tarp. The trail ahead was clear, the tracks from their outbound trip still etched into the snow, but Marcus kept his eyes flicking left and right, scanning the tree line that flanked them like frozen walls. Then came the sound, too fast and too heavy for a deer, too sharp and too violent to be the wind. A deep crashing noise exploded from the pine shadows on the left, and before Marcus could turn his head fully, a massive grizzly burst into view. It was running full tilt through snowdrifts, mouth open, eyes fixed not on the men, but on the sled. For a single second, neither of them reacted, frozen in disbelief. Then Marcus opened the throttle and the snowmobile leapt forward in a spray of white. But it wasn't enough. The bear hit the sled like a wrecking ball, claws sinking into the tarp and tearing through it as if it were tissue. Supplies flew out in every direction, bundles of fur, fuel cans, gear, and the sled jolted sideways, then flipped violently, snapping its rope and throwing Jeremy like a rag doll into the snow. Marcus skidded to a halt 50 yards ahead, unaware that his passenger was no longer behind him. Jeremy, disoriented and in pain, tried to stand but collapsed. His wrist hung loose and broken, and his hip throbbed from the impact. Behind him, the bear was tearing through the remains of the sled, ripping apart canvas and foam in a frenzy of hunger, confusion, and territorial rage. Marcus turned the snowmobile around and sped back toward the chaos, the machine bucking beneath him as he shouted, trying to draw the bear's attention. He veered dangerously close, revving the engine to its limit. The bear finally looked up, jaws stained red from a ruptured fuel can and shredded meat sacks. It lunged toward the sound, slapping at the air with one enormous paw, before retreating slightly, not out of fear but out of confusion, its instincts clashing with the noise and movement. Marcus reached Jeremy, slid the machine around to block the bear's path, and pulled his client up with one arm, ignoring the strain in his own shoulder. The bear advanced again, slower this time, studying them with cold black eyes that didn't blink. Marcus revved the throttle again, screaming now, the engine echoing across the valley, until the bear backed off and finally turned, disappearing into the pines the way it had come. Wasting no time, they rode hard for the cabin, an old forestry shelter a few kilometers away. The trip was brutal. Jeremy clung to Marcus with one hand, his other arm cradled awkwardly against his body, blood from his scraped temple freezing against his cheek. They reached the structure just before dusk, a narrow timber rectangle surrounded by snow-laden trees and the ghostly silence that always followed adrenaline. Inside, they barricaded the door with crates and furniture, lit the stove, and set up their emergency beacon. Marcus dressed Jeremy's wounds and splinted the wrist with scavenged wood and cloth. They slept in shifts, every groan of the wind making them flinch. The radio chirped to life near midnight. An airlift was inbound. By dawn, the snow outside was covered in tracks, some of them fresh and unmistakably ursine, circling the perimeter of the cabin like a ghost too restless to disappear. When the chopper arrived just after sunrise, both men were pale, exhausted, and shaking from more than just the cold. Later, wildlife experts determined that the grizzly had likely failed to hibernate due to irregular weather patterns linked to a warming climate. Warmer early winters can prevent bears from reaching the critical body mass required to trigger torpor, leading to periods of erratic behavior and increased human conflict. The animal had probably been scavenging for days, half-starved and driven mad with hunger when it encountered the scent of meat and fuel in the sled. The bear was never found. Local authorities increased patrols along the trap lines, issuing updated advisories and temporary bans in areas of known bear activity. Marcus, who had lived through avalanches, broken bones, and close calls with wolves, admitted later that he had never felt true helplessness until he saw that sled ripped open as if made of paper, and the man he was responsible for flung into snow like so much cargo. Jeremy's injuries healed, but he never returned to the woods. His curiosity about the wild had been replaced with something colder, more sobering, a respect born not from wonder, but from survival. In the backcountry, everything moves with intent. Every shadow might carry weight, and sometimes when the earth shifts and the weather forgets its timing, the ones that should be asleep stay awake, and they come hungry. The storm rolled in without warning, sweeping across the frozen sea like a living curtain, folding the horizon into itself until sky and ice blended into one vast, colorless void. Somewhere deep in the Svalbard archipelago, far north of mainland Norway, two climate researchers had been driving their tracked weather van across the sea ice, collecting atmospheric readings from remote sensors scattered along a study grid. The vehicle, a reinforced model designed to withstand Arctic conditions, rumbled to a stop near a beacon that had gone offline during the previous week's storm. Wind howled through the ice ridges, and snow danced in tight, blinding spirals, reducing visibility to less than a few feet in any direction. Erika Madsen, 33, a seasoned assistant researcher from Tromsø, stayed inside the van's warm cabin while her partner, Lars Ekstrom, a 40-year-old field technician with over a decade of polar experience, braced himself against the wind outside, his figure quickly swallowed by the blur of the whiteout as he moved toward the antenna array. He was no more than 20 yards away, but already looked like a ghost, head bent, tools clutched in thick gloves, every movement deliberate and slow. Inside, Erika adjusted dials, recorded atmospheric pressure, and glanced anxiously toward the door every few seconds, straining to make out Lars's shape beyond the frost-covered windshield. Their radios crackled uselessly, the storm interfering with transmission, and the engine idled softly, a low hum swallowed by the screaming wind outside. The storm was intensifying, but the data had to be collected before the next shift of ice rendered the station unreachable. She was writing a number in her log when she heard it, a muffled crunch, almost like a footstep, followed by a faint thud near the rear panel. She froze, pen hovering, eyes flicking to the side mirror just in time to see a strange shape materialize from the swirling snow. Something large, bulky, and wrong. Then it stepped fully into view. Not 20 feet from the van, almost invisible until it was nearly upon them, a massive polar bear emerged from the white, its fur matted with ice, ribs faintly visible beneath its pale coat, black eyes locked on the idling machine. Her breath caught. For a second, the animal just stood there, steam curling from its nostrils as it sniffed the air, neck low, muscles tight beneath its frame. It moved with a sluggish grace, circling the van slowly, paws crunching through the thin crust of snow over the sea ice. Its body looked leaner than it should have for early winter. It didn't look cautious. It looked hungry. Erika's heart pounded as she reached for the internal latch and slammed it shut, locking the rear door, her fingers shaking. She crawled forward into the driver's seat, never taking her eyes off the bear, which now stood only 5 feet away, staring through the glass with a terrible stillness. Then, without warning, it reared up, an explosion of motion in a space that had been quiet, and brought both front paws crashing down against the side window. The reinforced glass spiderwebbed instantly, the entire vehicle rocking under the impact. Erika screamed, scrambling back toward the equipment rack as the bear struck again, its claws slicing through the weakened panel with a deep, guttural groan of tearing plastic and aluminum. She shouted Lars's name, but the storm devoured her voice. Outside, Lars had turned at the first sound of cracking, confused, then saw the van jolting violently and the towering shape clawing through its side. He dropped his tools and ran, boots slipping on the slick ice as he flailed toward the chaos, his flashlight beam flickering wildly. He reached the van just as the bear tore a hole through the side panel, and he grabbed the outer handle, yanking the door open, trying to pull himself through. The bear reacted instantly. Its massive head swung down, jaws clamping onto Lars's parka sleeve and yanking him backward with terrifying force. His body slammed into the doorframe, legs flailing, his torso caught between the frame and the bear's grip. Erika lunged for the emergency kit, knocking over monitors and notebooks, fumbling until she found the flare gun near the base of the bench. The van was shaking, panels crumpling under the bear's weight. Lars, screaming now, blood smearing the inside wall where his arm had caught on jagged metal. Erika snapped the flare into place, leaned out through the shattered opening, and fired, point blank, into the animal's chest. The flare burst in a shower of sparks, striking fur and hide, hissing as it ignited the smell of singed hair. For a split second, the light reflected off its eyes, turning them into orbs of red fire. The bear let go with a deep, snarling grunt, stumbling backward into the snow, swiping at the burning embers. Then, with one last look at the vehicle, it turned and vanished into the storm, leaving behind steaming tracks and a silence that felt too heavy to be real. Erica pulled Lars the rest of the way inside, slamming the remains of the door shut with a jolt. He was conscious but bleeding, his sleeve soaked red, the skin beneath shredded. She wrapped his arm, packed snow to slow the bleeding, and called out over the emergency channel, praying their signal reached someone. It took 6 hours before a helicopter could make it through the storm. When it finally arrived, the rescuers found the van half-crushed on one side, with deep claw gouges running along the panels, blood pooled on the interior floor, and all equipment scattered or broken. Lars had lost significant blood but survived. Erica, though uninjured, never stopped shaking, not even as the rescue chopper lifted off the ice. She sat stiffly in her harness, her hand still wrapped around the flare gun long after the chamber had cooled, her mind trapped in the moment when the white closed in and the world stopped making sense. Experts later concluded that the bear had likely been starving, possibly separated from stable hunting grounds due to unstable ice flows and warming waters, and confused by the smell, sound, and warmth of the vehicle. In its desperation, it had attacked the van as if it were a source of food. The incident triggered new travel regulations for all polar research vehicles in Svalbard, mandating armed escorts and perimeter detection systems during operations in active bear zones. In the far north, even the thickest steel walls and best data mean nothing when a starving predator rises out of a whiteout, when the ice opens its mouth and the storm grows teeth.